We all know that the right habits and mindsets can be transformational in how we live our lives. But among the sea of advice online, it can be challenging to know who to trust with these important life decisions. At The Standard, we answer those questions and introduce you to some of the most successful people in the world in their fields and the habits and the mindsets they use to achieve their success. To learn more about our social platform, head on over to www.thestandardapp.com. And now, your host, myself, Chris Pallatroni. All right, welcome to another episode of The Standard. I am your host, Chris Pallatroni, and today's guest is Allie Katz. What a phenomenal human. I got introduced to Allie maybe about 6-7 months ago through my wife, Stephanie, who was our first guest on this podcast. And Allie is so knowledgeable. She is a trauma expert. She is a life coach, really sort of anything mental health and wellness related. This lady knows her stuff incredibly well. We had a phenomenal conversation. We talk a little bit about meditation. We talk about affirmations. We talk about environment and the power of your friends and your family. Our conversation sort of bob and weave through a lot of different topics. But in this episode, you get a lot of insight as to the things that Allie has learned over the years that she practices day in and day out to really support herself as an entrepreneur, as a coach, to really make sure that, her cup is as full as can be so that she can pour into others as well. Beautiful woman. I think you're going to really like this episode. And so without further ado, this is Allie. Doing wonderful. I think you got your podcast hat on today.
I know. I'm ready to go.
Oh, my Lord. Well, yay. So excited to talk with you today, dude.
Yeah, me too. It's going to be great.
I know. All mental health and wellness stuff. Who doesn't want to just talk about this all the time?
I know. I always go home and I'm always like, Ryan, I'm going to tell you all these things. And he's like, this is not what I nerd out on. So I love you so much.
I
And
know.
let's change the conversation. I'm like, yeah, it's heavy, but I love it. So it's fun to talk to other people that love it too.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I remember, over the years, I've done so much research. Like my background traditionally is not in mental health and wellness. So when I decided to get into this space, I was just so overwhelmed, right? We see all the famous people out there and we're like, God, they know so much. Like Jay Shetty's brilliant and all these
Mm-hmm.
different people. And so I was like, I'm just going to read a lot. And so I read hundreds of books, and a lot of them were on self-development and mental health. And then I started reading books on like climate change, and I wanted to see which, somebody would be like, well, climate change isn't exactly mental health. And I'm like, dude, it is so mental health. Like it is so
Yeah.
connected. And so then I read
Yeah.
all these books on climate change, and I started to recognize like everything is mental health and wellness. Like give me a
Mm-hmm.
topic and I will anchor it right back to mental health and wellness. So why wouldn't we just talk about this nonstop all the time? So it's
Totally. I totally agree. It's so true. I mean, and I think that people are you know, disconnected from it, even though now it's we know that mental health is important after COVID, but I still feel like there's still a stigma. There's still not enough understanding. There's still people that don't feel comfortable talking about it or don't want to talk about it. And I'm like, why? It's if you can lean into it, your whole life can change.
yeah. A
Yeah.
lot of psychologists, I remember listening to a couple, and it's like, stigma is such a big issue that we all face. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so fascinating too, because nobody wants to raise their hand and say, hey, struggling over here, emergency light
Uh-huh.
in the car. And when I did all this research on mental health, the three big barriers that I could see was stigma, accessibility, and affordability, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
one,
Yeah.
people don't want to talk about it. And you need those personal stories. So the more people that have the courage to step up and say, hey, I've dealt with this, not a super sexy topic, but I dealt with this. What it does is it sets the tone for other people to be like, oh wow, we can talk about that. And then all of a
Yeah,
sudden you get a bunch of
totally.
people out of the woods saying, oh yeah, me too, I've dealt with that. And then all of a sudden, like,
Mm-hmm.
the stigma is being broken down and so forth. So, I'm all about like, not everybody's going to be there, but just, those that have the courage to share should share, because it's not just for their benefit, which it does have effects, but it really does have a lot of positive effects for other people too.
Totally.
So,
I always I think Brene Brown said this, but she said, your story is going to be someone else's survival guide.
it literally
And
is the backbone of the standard. Like that's
yeah,
spot on. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it's so true. I mean, people that I've looked at that are have the same story or same journey, and I'm looking at them and they're 3 or 4 years ahead in their journey or 10 years or 20 years. And like they are my guide when I am having a rough day,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, without a doubt. All right, sweet. Well, I've done a lot of digging around. By the way, Stephanie says hello.
Oh, tell
She also said
him
don't have kids anytime soon, 'cause
to
the kids are on,
hi.
it's, day 1 of summer vacation, and she said there's a prison inside the house, so she's like, "Tell Allie to wait." So anyways, that's the message for today.
I love that. That's actually a really good message. I need to hear that because I always get in my head about having them now or waiting. And
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
like, I would rather wait
Yeah, if
a
you talk
little
to her
bit,
today,
you
she
know?
would say, "Just don't have a period." We caught her at a bad
I
moment
love
there.
her.
But
I
anyways,
need to catch up with her.
so for everybody that's listening, maybe you can give us a little bit of, like, your background. We don't have to go all the way to, like, birth, but, like, give us a little bit of background as to, like, who you are and, like, some of the things you've encountered and, like, how we sort of, like, got to here today so people understand some context here.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Allie Cates. I'm a trauma recovery coach. My journey really started, a long time, but when my trauma really came up was my husband and I lost three people in 9.5 months from one another to
Mm,
cancer, an accident, and a hit and run.
mm,
And so these deaths brought up this trauma that I had had in childhood that I completely disassociated from and just really forgot about. And I remember I had tried other modalities, like I was in counseling when I was younger, and I, had done talk therapy, and every one of these practitioners were just kind of like, "You're okay, you're scrappy, you get it," because I had struggled with anxiety and depression, but it came up in a really big way when these deaths happened. And I remember specifically, like, I'm on a bike ride with my husband, and I'm at my lowest point in my life. I'm having like suicidal ideation. I'm at a very low. And I called a trauma recovery coach in town that I found. And he's like, I'm telling him about what's going on. He's like, you're not probably not gonna believe me, but that's called trauma. And he's like, I've worked with veterans and PTSD specifically for about 40 years. And he's like, it happens with everyday individuals. And I was like, I don't have trauma, even though I did have a couple big
yeah,
T traumas happen in my life, but I just didn't associate them as trauma because I'm like, I haven't been to war, right? And so, fast forward, that's 22. Fast forward about 3.5 years, I'm 3 weeks out from getting married to my wonderful husband now. And I get diagnosed with late stage chronic Lyme and a whole host of other autoimmune conditions. And we come back from our honeymoon. I sit in an IV room for 9.5 months, 3 to 4 times a week, 6 to 8 hours a day. And I'm like broken down to my core, having like a dark night of the soul.
yeah,
I'm like, what's happening? Like, this is a lot. And I had to quit my job that I loved. I was in development, and I remember just thinking, like, this is breaking you down to build you back up into the person if you can allow it to happen, right? So I sat in the IV room and I listened a lot. And what people always came up with was like they needed a place to cope with what was going on with them. So then my coaching business was really born out of the IV room. And it started to kind of take off during COVID because I had been in quarantine because of, my immune system was suppressed. I was on these IVs, I had a port in my chest, all the stuff. So my immune system was lowered. So I was kind of already in quarantine before COVID hit. And so I had a lot of, not a lot. I mean, I was probably about like 9 months ahead of people. So I had already been in a place where like my mental health had tanked again and I was alone in isolation. And so that's when my business kind of started to take off. And I never thought I'd be here, Chris. I literally was like, if you told me I would be in trauma, 10 years ago, I would have laughed you out of the room. I thought I was gonna be like the next Aaron Andrews and talk to the hot football players on the side of the, NFL,
yeah.
and I'm here. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of like the not quick and dirty version of my story, but a little bit longer part of it.
So why get into coaching at all? Like, what was it about your trauma
Great
that
question.
made you want to help people?
Yeah, I mean, at first, before COVID hit, I wanted to run a retreat where people could come and try on different healing techniques and modalities. And then when COVID hit, I was like, oh, I have to step up and be the face of my business. I always wanted to be like the magician kind of behind the
Yeah.
scene. And then when COVID hit, I was like, I have to be in the front. And for me, it was like coaching was always kind of the role that I leaned towards.
Hmm.
And the reason why is because I just love what it can do for people when you're in that capacity, when you're being held in a container and you're able to see things shift and you're being held accountable, like so much magic can happen. And I had experienced that in my own coaching with a coach, me being a recipient of coaching. So I was like, I know that how powerful this is, and I wanted to help people like be in the weeds with them.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just had a podcast earlier this week with a gentleman by the name Brad Rowe, and he's sort of he's a bodybuilder, you know what I mean? But he's a coach, like all the people that are on the podcast. And it was so interesting. Our conversation deviated a little bit, and we were talking about like AI technology. And it's a conversation I have very frequently with a lot of people, including my trainer, of like, man, you can just Google anything these days or chat this and you can get an
Mhm.
answer. And so my question to him was like, how do you protect up against like this AI wave that's coming in? And his answer was, very spot on. Was just it's the human connection. It's the
Mhm.
accountability. Like we can't see too far off in the future where machines are going to take over the accountability and the human connection, and that's what people want. They want to know I'm not alone. Like it's one thing to provide someone an answer of you've got this and this is how you solve this, and that, for some people that might work, but a lot of people want to know, like, hey, you went through this too. What was that like? What was the emotion?
Mm.
What was the feeling? And they sort of want a companion in some ways through that. And I think really what they're doing is they're looking for this, like, hey, I'm not this weirdo out there that's just faced with this isolated incident. Like, there's other people that go through it too. And it's that human connection that really inspires people and sort of propels them to like take action and whatnot. And so I'm pretty sure that like as you share your story, it absolutely helps when you get coaching clients and even get people just to pay attention to you, I would imagine.
Yeah, for sure. And I think too is like, AI and everything is so great. Like we have so much resources, TikTok and like everything. Like we're being bombarded with information, but it is like the human connection. And especially with trauma, it's like we're working with the body, right? So
Yeah.
like no AI is gonna take over being able to work with your body and like actually move the trauma that's stored in your body out. I mean, that's how I look at it. And also you're right, it's such a personal connection, right? Like you wouldn't want to go to a trainer that isn't hasn't experienced what you want to experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really
Yeah.
goes back to that Brene Brown quote. I mean, I think there's a lot of power in all different types of coaches and therapists and counselors out there. But I don't know, like part of me is like, God, what really can like tug at the heart of an individual? It's finding somebody not exactly like you, but has been in very similar situations. And if you're dealing with anxiety or you're dealing with depression or domestic violence or whatever issue you may be faced with, even if it's something as simple as like I just can't eat right, or I struggle to do exercise, when you run into somebody who was in your shoes
Mm.
but just managed to make it a little further down the road, I think that's really easy for people to look and be like, oh my god, you actually know what it's like to face this. And I think it's so much easier for those people to listen to that and to take that advice and want to actually deploy some sort of change. It's like the addict that's
Yeah.
telling you about their story and they're no longer an addict. You're like, tell me how the hell you stop this. And so I don't know, like that's so much of what the standard is about, is like taking people that have, not unique situations, unique to them, but situations that they're willing to share, and making them accessible to people that are also facing those issues, and to draw some inspiration forward to that. So obviously the concept of mental health and wellness, I think, are highly interconnected. They obviously can be standalone in some ways. For you specifically, when did the idea of like habits and mindsets and all of this
Mm.
stuff, like, do you remember when it really started to take hold in your life?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I would say this is so wild to me. So I read James Clear Atomic
Yeah.
Habits, right? Like, I don't know, probably 3 years ago. Yeah, it was about 3 years ago when I was starting my business. And I remember him calling out things like just the pointing and calling, or like stacking,
Mhm.
or, putting like these social cue or these cues, like putting your gym clothes out. And I already would do those things. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, there's a term for this." And I was
Yep.
thinking about it, like, where did I get this knowledge to do this? And it was my grandma. So, my grandma was literally my best friend in the entire world. She was
Yay.
my woman, and she taught me from a very young age, I think, like, probably 2 or 3, like, you make the bed and you have these little habits in your life, like, you take your supplements in the morning, etcetera. And so that's, like, the one habit that I have to this day is I will make my bed every single day. I'll make it on vacation. I will make it at a friend's house. If I'm staying at a friend's house, like, it might be quick and dirty. If I'm, like, at a vacation, it's not, like, perfectly folded and everything. But I would say that the concept of habits was started at a really young age, and then I've just built on top of that as I've grown my business because I have to have habits in order to be successful, right? Like making sure that I'm working out, taking care of my own mental health, meditating or getting some mindfulness in every single day. So those have been a little bit harder to like implement, I would say, or stick true to them because life gets in the way and you have to wake up or you're waking up late or you spilled coffee or whatever the thing is, right? But I will say the one habit that I have is making my bed every single day, no matter what. If I'm sick, if like anything. Yeah.
Yeah, that one comes up a lot. That was actually Brad's number one habit too when we talked on Tuesday. He's like, I come from a military family. It's making the
Yep.
bed. It's that sense of accomplishment so early in the morning. Me and Steph do the same thing. Make the bed. That's how you sort of start
You
the day.
have to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's because my grandpa was a colonel in the military, so that's probably
Okay.
what it is, right? It's like, yeah, very military mindset, which I love that because you feel accomplished by 10 o'clock if you don't do anything else before 10. You made your bed.
There you go. There you go. So
Yeah.
when we look at like your best habits, obviously you got lots of different habits that you have right now in your life, and clearly different habits have probably served you more or less throughout your life. What would you say? You're an entrepreneur now, right? You're very in
Yep.
tune with mental health and wellness. So you have this wealth of knowledge about all these different things you should and should not be doing. At this stage of your life, what is the one habit that contributes the most to your mental health and your well-being?
Meditation,
All right. So talk
hands
about that a little
down.
bit. What does meditation look like for you?
It's different every day. Like, if I have time, I'll do a 30-minute guided meditation with, like, Kundalini breath work, and I'll just, like, have that on repeat for a couple of weeks. Sometimes it's, like, me just visualizing and sitting in, like, visualization and, like, what I wanna be in 2 years from now, and, like, just feeling what that feels like in my body. Sometimes it's a minute of just, like, doing a body scan and checking in with myself to be like, "You're here. This is where you're at." But in the last, like, 3 years, I would say I picked up meditation in the IV room, and it's something that just allows me to be like, "Okay, things might shit might be hitting the fan today," right? Like, I might not feel great about my workout or my body or anything, my business, whatever, like, stuff comes up as you're an entrepreneur and your mindset and everything. But if I can take a minute to just really connect with myself and connect with something bigger, it's like that shifts the game. And I can tell when I'm not on it, when that habit is not being held, when I'm not holding myself accountable to that habit, I can tell my whole mindset's thrown off. And I used to hate people that talked about meditation. I'm like, okay, guys, we get it. Meditate and it'll change your life. But like, it really has helped me so much to just tune in and kind of like, tune into myself and tune out to everything else that's kind of buzzing in my world.
So there's a lot that you said there. So let's try to unpack a little bit of it. This started for you a handful of years back. It sounds like you give yourself a fair amount of freedom in the sense of when this happens in your day. Like, is there
It
a
usually
start?
happens in the morning, so it
Okay.
always happens in the morning. I always try to do it, like, in the morning before I pick up my phone or I'm tapping into other people's energy. Because as a coach, it's
Okay.
like your clients are checking in, etcetera, so I'm always trying to fill up my cup before I pour into other people.
Okay. So this is a morning activity for you. And is it regiment to the point of like every morning at 7 or like something like that? Or is it more a little bit more intuitive in terms of like when you need to do it?
It's more like it's in the first hour, hour and a half of waking up. It's not
Okay.
always at, like, right when I wake up. It's like, okay, yeah, it's just always in the morning time is what I will say. So there's a little bit more flexibility there.
And is it always before you tap into other people's energy? So before the email,
Yes.
before the phone, before you
Yes.
plug into the machine, if you will?
Yes. I always try to not look at my phone for at least an hour and a half or 2 hours before waking up. Like, that's kind of my non-negotiable
Okay.
because I can tell that it shifts my energy when I'm like, "Oh, this is the email, and, oh, I need to follow up with this, and I need to check in with Monica, who's my team member, and blah, blah, blah."
Yeah.
Like, that will kind of put me in work mode. So it's always helpful to not check my phone, to have some type of mindfulness meditation in the morning.
Yeah, and if there was a habit for listeners to pick up on too, I would say like learning to not pick up your phone in the morning and also not look at your phone before you go to bed, because there is a lot of truth in allowing something you read, a news article, an email, a text, to absolutely throw you off track to start your day. So I think it's brilliant that you're trying to find your why, or be centered before you really plug into that. So, but walk me through this. This is probably where like I think most people that understand habits are like, well, how does this happen, Ali? Like you don't have a specific time you do it. You don't have a specific way you do it every time, right? Sometimes it's 30 minutes, sometimes it's 1 minute. It sounded like sometimes it's more gratitude based, sometimes it's more checking in with the body. Like
Hmm.
I don't know, if I'm a newbie to habits, I'm like, well, how the hell do you make the decision as to like it sounds like there's a lot of just like intuitiveness that happens with this. Like walk us through that. Like
Mm,
was that always the way
yeah.
that it was designed to be for you,
No.
or
No. It was very regimented at first
okay.
because I was like, I know that I have to do this and I don't know how to do it yet. So it was very much like I woke up first 10 minutes, I'm sitting down and I'm meditating either by a guided meditation. Yeah, it was mainly just guided meditation at that point. So that was for like the first 6 months, I would say. It's like every day, wake up, guided meditation, right? And now I'm like, okay, I know that I need to get a meditation in. And so there's a little bit more flexibility because I've found as I've grown in this habit is that sometimes I need something different, right? So I've like played around with the habit a little bit. And so I'm not as rigid in it. I just know that I need to get it in the morning before I check into other people's energy. But of course, like when it was a new habit, I'm like, there's no way I'm going to stick to this. It's like going to the gym, right? It's so much easier to be like, okay, at 6 a.m., I'm putting on my gym clothes. I'm getting in the car for a 6:30 class, right? And you do that over and over again. And then I don't know, for me, that's just kind of how I function is that I need a lot of structure in the beginning, and then afterwards, I'm like, "Okay, I know what my body needs, I'm pretty tuned in," and go with my intuition more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And one thing you said in there that I think is worthy calling out is like so much of it's trial and error. I think with a
Mhm.
lot of habits, people are like, I've got to do exactly like this. And look, dude, don't mistake it. I'm definitely one of those people that's like, I do need a fair amount of structure for some things, and then other things are a little bit more intuitive. Like they're part of your identity for you. You've done this for 3 years. It's probably just who you are. You do this. It's less of like, oh my God, I need to meditate. I know it's good for me. And it's like, no, I really want to do this. And you have a lot more non-judgment as to like the way you go about it. If it's 1 minute, it's 1 minute.
Yeah.
Um, is it always you didn't mention this, but is this always done inside, or like does some of your meditation creep into the outdoors at all?
Right now it's always done inside
Okay.
because 'cause we're in an apartment, we're in the middle of transitioning home, so it's always done inside, like, I have a pillow, like, I
Okay.
have a spot in the house,
All
so
right.
that's always kinda my cue is, like, take the pillow down, sit here, look out at the sunshine, get the sunshine on your face. Yeah, it's a lot easier for me to meditate inside than outside for some reason right now, and I think that's just because of the space where our home is right now.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's always inside, it's always specific spot, specific pillow, like,
All
that
right.
part is very dialed in, yeah.
What happens? I know you touched on this a little bit ago, but I'd love to dive into it. Like, what happens when you don't meditate?
Mm. It's so wild. What happens when I don't meditate is that I get really critical of myself. Like, the inner critic starts to come in very loudly, and I'm just more on edge. Like, I don't have as much tolerance for if things are going, not the way that I plan them to be. And I just feel really disconnected from myself. So, like, it's a trickle effect. It's like a domino effect. It's like when you stop working out and then you have to, like, go back to the gym and you're like, "Oh god, I gotta do this again," and then there's, like, shame and all this. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a domino effect, and my mental health does take a toll for sure with that.
Does it ever get to a place where I don't know, you're not doing it for multiple days in a row? Like in the last 3 years, since this has been a habit, have you I don't know, have you relapsed to the point where it's like you're off for a week and you're like, I don't know, has it got to that point at all for you, or?
For sure,
Okay.
for sure. There's definitely been moments of that, like, when I've been, I'm getting over being sick with COVID.
Okay.
And so it's like that's like a great call out right there is I think I went like 3 days without it. And I was like, we know where this is gonna go because it's so easy to like forget the habit and not do it. So it's definitely like and there have been times too in the 3 years where like I'm on vacation or something. I'm like, oh, I can do this later. I'll just do it later. I'm on vacation. I'm more lax, right? And but I'll make my bed though. But like meditation, because it's a newer habit for me in the last
Mhm.
3 years, it's not something that I've done for my whole life, right? Yeah, for sure. There's always been time. There has been 2 times where I'm like, you know where this is going to go because you've already been there. So it's like the
So
discipline.
how do you snap back into it? I mean, I think so many people can resonate with the, whether it's the nutrition, it's the gym, it's the meditation of like, hey, we did it. I felt great doing it. Something knocked me off balance. I'm not doing it. You're now in like the habit of not doing the habit, if you will. Like, how do you get back into it?
That's a good question. Honestly, for me, it's like, oh, I know where this is going to go. Like, I feel like for me, my mental health the last 10 years has been so number one because I know how it feels to be at like a lowest low. That it's like I have these things set up so that I can function at like my highest level. And especially when you're running a business, right? You have to be functioning at a higher level so that you can help other people.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's like, I know how this is going to go. I know that it's going to spiral and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. It's never going to get better. Right. I
Yeah.
always feel like the hardest step is actually making the step to like sit my ass down and do a meditation or put on my gym clothes again or go get some vegetables or whatever the thing is. Like if it's nutrition or it's working out or what it is. And for me, because I come from a place of like being trauma informed, I'm always questioning like, is this a fight or flight response? Like, where's my nervous system at? And
Yeah.
like, why am I self sabotaging here because things are getting too good and there's like this fight or flight coming in, right? So I'm always like questioning and just kind of gut checking, like what's going on here, Allie, and repivoting and readjusting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's actually one of the newer things I've started doing is doing like a weekend recap on my Instagram feed.
Mm,
I'm not as comfortable just like always having videos about myself out there, but one of the ones I've always felt comfortable doing is, and I've done them over the years. I just haven't publicized them. Is like, what's it like to run a business? What's it like to try to build something? I don't think there's enough vulnerability in the entrepreneurial space to talk about. It's really hard. Like, you know what I mean? I think there's this perception of leaders of good companies of like we always got it together and we know. No, you don't know. Like, let's be honest, we're making this shit up as we go along. Like, and
yeah,
so the
yeah.
the point of this reel is to like just give like here's like 60-90 seconds of like what it's like. And what I talked about this week being coming off of mental health awareness month is the fact that you have to take such good care of yourself if you have the aspirations to lead or to support other people. And that doesn't have to mean building a company. That can mean just supporting your family or
Yeah.
supporting your friends. But you said it earlier, and we've talked about on this podcast before, is you can't pour from an empty cup. And so I even tell
Hmm.
Steph all the time, I'm like, dude, go get your nails done if that's what you want. Go for a walk. Like, I don't care what it is you feel you need to do to take care of yourself. You should absolutely do it. You should be wickedly selfish and go do it, because if you don't do it, then me, the boys, your fans, like everybody gets less of you. And
Hmm.
so I think that's really, really critical for people to understand is like, hey, if you can't do it for yourself, if the intrinsic motivation is not there for your own sanity and, clarity and whatever you're doing, like, then look to those people that you care a lot about and just recognize that they're just getting less of the good you by you
Hmm.
not doing those things. And I think
Yeah.
that's really
Yeah.
critical.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's so much I can say on this topic. I think that though, like self-sabotage, for me, it's comfortable, right? Like self-sabotage and I think that's where like the habit, and I have to check myself is like, why are you self-sabotaging? Because, when we talk about trauma, when we talk about mental health, it's like choosing yourself if you've been through any type of trauma or nervous system dysregulation, which like at this point, everyone has nervous system dysregulation because we just went through COVID and et cetera, et cetera. We're in a mental health, I like to say pandemic, we really are.
Yeah.
And so it's like there's this point of like self-sabotage that feels comfortable because you know how it's going to go, right? You know exactly how the spiral is going to go. There's comfort in knowing how the spiral is going to go. And so I always have to just gut check myself and be like, "Girl, get your ass up and, like, don't do this." And I mean, it's hard because I know how that's gonna go. There's comfort and control in knowing how I'm gonna spiral out of control, right?
That's so crazy. That's so crazy. But it's so true. Like, oh my Lord, there's a lot to unpack on that.
Yeah.
All right, let's pivot over to mindsets here. And for those that are listening, like mindsets are everything. Like I would even
Mhm.
argue prior to a habit being formed, there needs to be a certain level of clarity as to like what you're trying to do in the first place. And so
Mhm.
I think whether we call it clarity, I like to refer to it as designing, we can call it a mindset, but obviously these are the things that are very similar to habits, although they may not have a structured time associated with them. But when you think of like a mindset that really serves you well right now, is there one that stands out for you?
Yeah, this is a not hot take, but for me, the thing is, like, that I'm not a victim of my circumstance.
Hmm.
I think, there's a lot of, like, health stuff and sexual assault and rape and et cetera, and it's like, I, for so long, was holding these things as my identity, which was then shaping my mindset. Like, "Oh, well, you can't do this thing because of what's happened to you. Oh, you know, life is hard because of X, Y, and Z." And when someone came in and held up a mirror and said, "There's another way to do this, and you're not a victim of your circumstance," I was like, "Oh shit." This like completely opened up a whole new persona of me, right? So yeah, that's like my biggest mindset right now is like you're not a victim of this circumstance and you can be the creator in your life because I always was giving over my power to like this thing or this disease or this illness or this person, or I was giving my power away a lot.
How does that manifest in your day? Is that journaling? Is that an affirmation you're saying in the mirror? Is that a thought? Like where is this mindset coming through on a daily basis, if it is coming through on a daily basis at all?
Yeah, I have sticky notes. I'm a sticky note freak, like
Okay.
on my mirrors.
Okay.
Ryan and I have like, what are those called? Like the 3M boards, like the ones that you can rip off and like
Hmm.
tear off.
Okay.
So we have like 3 or 4 kind of quotes for either the month or the season that we'll write out.
Okay.
And that's one of them is like, you're not a victim of your circumstance and like you're the creator of it. And that for me in the last like 6 months to a year has been really big. So yeah, I would say that that's like how I'm holding the mindset is affirmations. I do journal on and off, like when I'm feeling like after a meditation or before a meditation, if like my mind is buzzing, I'll journal for sure. But it's more the affirmations of seeing it every day, even if I'm not consciously picking up on it, like it's in my subconscious.
And how does that help you by saying that? I think there's a lot of people that I don't want to say they don't believe in the power of affirmations. I clearly do. I mean, it's like, we everything's created twice, once in the mind and then in the hand. So I totally get it. But like for those that like don't really understand the power of affirmations, how does seeing a small subset of words and saying this to yourself, like, how does that do anything for you? Like I mean, like what is this doing for you?
Yeah, so I had to learn a little bit about like subconscious reprogramming for it to really connect. And so we have 6,000 thoughts a day. 95% of them are not conscious. So they're like a record player kind of playing in the background, and 5% of them are conscious. So if you can somehow, control or rewire that 5%, it can control or it can help to influence the 95%. And so when I heard the statistics on that, I'm like, okay, so even though this feels silly of me like repeating this affirmation all the time, eventually it's going to become part of my subconscious, right? And then it's just going to be the way that I function in life. And it is like, I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, it's annoying, like at first, but I'm like, oh, this is just how I function in life. It's like, I don't even have to say it to myself anymore because I'm like, oh, it's embodied. It's a part of me now.
Yeah, I love that. So I haven't been as I haven't had a lot of affirmations that I've developed on my own over the years. But one thing I'm very big on that serves in a similar vein is I run a lot. I'm a runner, and I don't always
Mm,
listen to stuff. I think I stopped listening to music on my runs years ago just because I run so much. I got tired of that. And so now I've listened to like podcasts and, but I started developing these tracks of like motivational, I don't know, there's like these compilations of motivational stuff out, right? Some really well put together thing. And I've like combed thousands of them. And I found like, I don't know, like 10 to 15 that I really like. Some are, 5 minutes, some are 20 minutes, and I'll like smash them into, I just call it my morning run. And I look at it as like positive, like brainwashing in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And I think there was a period probably 2 years ago where I listened to this track every run for like a year. And
Mm,
I mean, I know every quote in the track. Like, I mean, I almost know them like in sequential order, like verbatim. Like, I mean, me and my wife like are throwing quotes at each other left and right. And there's such power to it because, to your point with the thoughts, like we have so many thoughts in a given day. The vast majority of our thoughts are not true. They're
yeah.
very repetitive. They tend to have a more negative bias to them. And when you really start to understand like the science behind the way our brain works, you're like, oh my God, we are not set up for success here. Like we really are not. I mean, we're set up for survival, but it doesn't mean we're set up for positive mental health and well-being. That's not exactly
Yeah.
how the human brain is constructed. And so when you start to realize like, okay, my thoughts are repetitive, they tend to lean towards negative. How do I induce more positive mojo? And so whether it's an
Hmm.
affirmation or in my case, like a soundtrack, like you sort of like drowned out the negativity with more positive. And I do believe it has very profound effects on, well, if you're just hearing more positive, there's just less room to hear the negative. So,
It's so true. And I will say that like that 95% that I was talking about is
yeah,
made from ages 0 to 7, right?
yeah,
So those are like you're like a sponge from ages 0 to 7. So the things that you heard, whether it's around money or around self-image or around mindset, etc., like from whoever raised you, like those are playing in the background all the time. So it's going to take work to rewire them and change them.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
can't stress enough like how important it is. It sounds like you have it in Ryan, right? His name's Ryan.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's we don't talk about it too much on this, but I'm sure we will at one point, is like just environment. Environment plays
Mm,
such a profound impact as to, how people are going to perform and shape their lives. Like, it's not, if you want a good habit book to read, I think we mentioned James Clear, Atomic Habits, in every podcast. I think everybody's read that book. But another one, if you haven't read it, is by BJ Fogg, Tiny Habits. He's a really
haven't
good
read
one.
it.
I had a chance. He's a Stanford professor, and he wrote a really good book, and it was very different than Atomic Habits. But among many things he points out on that book is environment. Environment plays a huge
Yeah.
role, and environment is not just the house I live in or the city I live in or the state. Clearly could be all of those things, but environment can also be your circle of friends, right?
Mhm.
Like, I mean, it doesn't matter how good of a human being you are. If you're always hanging around negative human beings, that's going to chip away at your ability to perform positive habits or positive mindset.
100%. 100%. I think that's something that people don't talk about enough. It's like you have to and it's because it's uncomfortable. If you've
Yeah.
grown up with people or you have some type of like tie to them and you feel like you have to be friends with them or you have to always see them or even family members that are
Oh,
super
yeah.
toxic. Like that's a huge one that I find clients having a really hard time with because there's this like, oh, but I have to because they're my family. There's like this unspoken thing that like you have to be around them even though they're really toxic and they're really shitty to you, and if they were a boyfriend you or a girlfriend you would have dumped them a long time ago, like there's a lot of that.
Yeah. And I'll only mention it because it was not going to be on, she won't listen to this podcast. Is like parents too.
Mm,
Like, I mean, I watch like the relationship with Stephanie and her mom sometimes, and I'm like, what are we doing here? Like, you wouldn't let any human being on the planet have this type of dialogue with you. And so I do think, and I'm not here to tell people you've got to find your own path in life, but I think some people can easily say it's easier to choose your friends, it's harder to choose your family. And look, I honestly, my personal perspective is that's a very old school belief. You're in
very
complete
old.
control here. Like, you do get to make boundaries, and like if you don't know how to build the boundary, then certainly go seek professional help, yourself. I'm sure you talk a
Yeah.
lot about boundaries with some of your clients.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, you may not get to choose your family from a blood perspective, but you absolutely get to choose how they interact with you and in what capacity. And if those are unhealthy relationships, then I would encourage you to highly re-examine how often you let them in your house, if at all, or do you
Yeah.
show up to the family barbecue? Because those things have very profound effects on people. And
Oh,
unfortunately, to
yeah.
your point, the trauma can unfortunately just stay with you your whole life because they're a constant reminder of that trauma.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I think is that, you know, family dynamics are are very dynamic and they're very
Yeah.
uncomfortable, and there's a lot around that. But I think too is that there's comfort in it, like what I was talking about before. It's like, and I talk about this like as like a ski slope. I'm like, your brain and your nervous system knows exactly that if you go down the groomers, do you like ski or snowboard or tube?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like if you go down the groomers and you're like, okay, I'm gonna catch an edge here, or like there's a tree there that I might run into, but you still keep on going down the groomers, right? And you're like, even though I know it's uncomfortable, I know I'm gonna fall, I know I'm gonna hurt my tailbone, I'm still gonna do it because there's control in it. And
Mhm.
it's the same thing with families. Is like, what if I told you, let's go over to this powdered run, and it might be a little bit scary at first. You might fall, but it's gonna be powdery, like it's gonna feel different, it's gonna feel uncomfortable, but there's like a pot of gold down at the end, if you set these boundaries, right? And
Yeah.
you have this, you're going to get this freedom. They're like, you know what? 95% of them are going to go, you know what? I'm good. I'm going to stay with the groomer because there's control in this. And
Yeah.
that's the same thing with family dynamics and like toxic relationships is you're like, that's just how my family is. I hear this all the time. That's just how my family is. They're just toxic and I just have to deal with it because they're my family. It's my mom. It's my dad. It's my sister. And I'm like, you actually don't. Like, fun fact of the day, you actually don't have to deal with that. But it's, like, up to you to make that decision to go, "I'm no longer taking on this energy." I will tell you that's probably one of the hardest things to do, because there's comfort in family dynamics, there's comfort in chaos.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it goes back to your mindset, right? Is like you're not a victim of your circumstance. And I don't know, when I talk to people, I think one of the hardest things that I think people struggle with is this idea that you are the designer, you're the architect, you're the
Mhm.
programmer, you're the author, like however you want to define it. Like you may not feel like you're in control, but you are, like, and
Yeah,
you do get this luxury of starting a new chapter now, writing a new
yeah,
program now. And I think people really struggle with that. I think we all have people in our lives that are just like, no, that's just the way it is. I got a really shitty job, and I'm in a really bad relationship, and I'm just not meant to be healthy. And it's like, I'm like, how do we just shake it and make you recognize, like, you do get to control these things if you want to control these things. And I think
yeah,
that's just really hard for people to grapple with, is how do you break that cycle of thinking a certain way your whole life and then realize that, like, oh my god, like I am in control. And that's also really scary for a lot of people too, because, like, let's
mhm,
be honest, like once you realize like you are in control and you're not just the puppet of nature or whatnot, like that can be a very scary feeling of like, oh my god, like it is actually my decision as to like everything that happens in my life. And I recognize that can be overwhelming for a lot of people too.
very overwhelming. And I think too, because most people, like, they don't know what to do with that. They don't know what to do with that much, like, I don't even know what the word is, ownership.
Yeah.
Because then the only person that you have to blame if you're not hitting your goals is you, right? If you don't have the mindset, if you don't have the morning
Yeah.
routine, if you don't have the schedule, if you don't have the boundaries, and you're still stuck in this rut, like you're still going down the powdered run, like the only person that's taking you down that run and getting you off the lift is you. No one's shoving you behind you,
Yeah.
you know? But I feel like too in mental health and trauma is like people, there is this part of it too where like around trauma, right? Where people are like, "Oh, but that's what's comfortable," or if there's developmental trauma there, it is harder to make that decision to go, "Oh, actually, I'm gonna go the other way," because like I've said, there's so much comfort in
Yeah.
staying the way that they're going.
Yeah. Without a doubt. Are there any habits or mindsets right now for you? I know the meditation is something that you've only been practicing for 3 years, and it sounds like even this mindset is fairly new. But are there any other habits or mindsets that, from your perspective, are under construction either ones
Mm.
that you're really trying to develop that are good habits, or maybe even a habit that you're like, this is actually a really bad habit that I have and I'm trying to deconstruct it? Like, is there any that come to mind that I'll just say are under construction, if you will?
Yeah, I would say my relationship with working out and food is definitely, like, one that's, like, I feel like constantly under construction. I'm just kinda sick of it at this point, but I definitely will say that that one right now has been it. When I got sick, I was working out every day, sometimes twice a day, really unhealthy, binging and, like, restricting, like, very just unhealthy. But I was like, "Oh my god, I'm in the best shape of my life, and this looks really good, and I'm doing so good, and, like, I look physically good," right? And, when you get sick, it's like when your body's in that space, like I ended up having sepsis in my port and they caught it before it, took over my whole body, which was really scary. And I remember in that moment being like, you got to give up this whole self image. Like your body's so precious. You just have to like be good and work out and eat healthy, right? Yeah. I think what I'm trying to go with this is like there's been a lot of restriction, there's been a lot of like just intense ways of eating. And for me, it's like right now, it's like just get good, healthy, whole foods in your body. Don't binge on treats like when you're not feeling good, and work out and like build muscle. And I think that's the first time in my life of like actually just building muscle to like be healthy instead of like, "Oh, I wanna look this way," or, "Oh, I'm going on vacation," or, "Oh, I have a big wedding coming up for a friend," or like, "Oh, oh, 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 oh," because when those goals end, it's like, then what? Like, "Oh, then
Mm.
I'm just gonna go back to, like, my
Yep.
old gross habits," right?
Yeah.
So, for me, it's that one is definitely under construction right now. I'm working with a trainer that's just been really great, and he's, like, so encouraging. So that's, like, a very new one, I'd say, in the last, like, month and a half.
Yeah. I hear
Yeah.
the workout and the nutrition. I mean, they're huge, huge blocks. Yeah, and I totally agree with you that they say it's like, the milestone is a tough one too to attach any sort of significance on some sort of specific outcome, a weight drop, a certain look, a certain event. Because to your point,
Mhm.
when once you pass that threshold, if you haven't learned to appreciate the journey, it's really easy to relapse. And I was listening to, I don't know if you ever follow like Andrew Huberman.
Yeah, I love him.
He's like blown up like over the last
I
couple of
love
years.
him. Yeah.
And I remember I caught one of his things here, and I just trust what he says is like, accurate since he's wicked smart. And he was like, do the best job you can to not get a dopamine hit
Yep.
before the activity or after the activity. Like the most ideal scenario would be to get the dopamine hit from doing the activity. And it's to try to not have these false reward systems put into place, and to, I guess, get more intrinsic reward out of like the physical act of eating healthy or doing whatever exercise it is. Maybe easier said than practiced, but I think there's some validity to it.
No,
Um,
for sure. That's always so hard, right? Is because I feel like especially if you read anything or you're on Pinterest or like remember when we had like the magazines? Like everyone bought magazines and it's
yeah.
like this is what the ideal thing is. This is how you lose 10 pounds. This is how you slim down for summer. Like all this shit
Oh,
that we're
totally.
bombarded
Yeah.
with. And I like we still have that mindset. It's like, "Oh, well, it's summertime, so we're gonna slim down. This is what we're gonna look like, blah, blah, blah." It's like abs are made in the kitchen during the winter, like not in the summer when you need to drop 10 pounds before you're going to a wedding. Like, and that's been something that I've had to definitely reframe a lot because, yeah, I mean, it's very easy to get caught up in that. Like, what's the new trend? Oh, it's paleo. Oh, it's keto. Oh, it's this. Oh, it's that. Like, and it's just like, just do whatever you need to do that's healthy for yourself, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I would say for anybody that like for those topics that are super sensitive, like there are like so many cool little hacks you can do to like try to like build it. I know for look, sugar is a drug in itself. There's very few people that are immune to sugar. I mean, I could eat a cookie after every meal. I mean, I can almost live on cookies and coffee. And so there are ways that people can build, using sort of atomic habit type principles. I'm a big one of like, one, don't go to the grocery store hungry, first of all.
Yeah.
Like maybe eat a nice meal, a healthy meal, and then go shopping. And just don't bring the crap into your house, because human nature is we're really lazy, and the idea of you leaving your house when you're craving a Snickers bar or whatever it is you're craving is highly unlikely. you're probably more
Yeah.
likely to go like grab 2 spoonfuls of peanut butter, versus like so there's like all these little hacks that you can start to do to like build in better reinforcement of like not a complete, hey, I'm always going to eat healthy, but maybe if I do eat unhealthy, I'm eating less unhealthy, if you will. And the
Mhm.
same thing with exercise too. There's lots of cool things if that's something people struggle with. Is there anybody that you can think of that you would want to know their habits or mindsets, whether it's a friend, a family, a famous person, but is there anybody that you're like, that would be interesting to know, like what the hell this person's doing to take care of themselves?
You know, this sounds so bad. The first person that comes to mind is, like, Kim Kardashian.
Okay.
I don't know how her nervous system is, I'm really curious about that, but I'm curious about her mindset because she just goes for it. Like,
Mm,
that whole clan, whether you hate or you love them, like, any one of us that runs a business on social media, like, has to give them kudos, her and Paris
yeah.
Hilton, but that's on another tangent, but I would really just love to know what their mindset is when they get negative reviews or
Oh yeah.
like when people are coming at them or, they live their life so out loud. I'm always curious of like, what is your mindset? What are your habits? What time are you
Interesting.
waking up? And
Yeah.
obviously they have a whole team behind them, right?
Yep.
So it's like, of course, it's very privileged. I would say them. I think also like Tim Ferriss, which he talks a lot about his stuff. Brene Brown, I would love to know hers too because
Yeah.
she has, like, faith and religion in what she does, and so I'm always curious about, like, her line between the 2, you know? Yeah, that could go on and on. I love this question.
Yeah, it's an interesting one too. You're probably one of the first people that have answered it more from the perspective of on your mindsets, which is where I go. I feel like I have pretty good sustainable habits. And so I find that really interesting. Of like, well, what do they do? And I'd love to know runners and stuff like that. But the mindsets one's really interesting, especially when you get into people that from our perspective, you feel like they're well accomplished, and
Yeah.
I don't mean well accomplished in the sense of like fame or fortune, although it could be that, but just how they navigate stuff. Like I think business is a really interesting one as well. If you're a pioneer of some medical device or some big company, it's like, let's be honest, a lot of pressure that's put on. Like, and I mean, I know from the little company I got here, like a lot of pressure all the time that we put on ourselves. And so understanding how people navigate that, I think, is really interesting. One of the final questions I got for you here, and this is one of my favorite questions, is with all that you know about mental health and wellness, and when you start to look at like all the challenges we face as a society, not just US, but just the world at large, is there any habit or mindset you wish you could just wave a wand and every human being had it? That you feel personally that it would like nudge us in a more loving and kind direction as a society? Like what would that habit or mindset be that would make us better?
Mm, I'm gonna go with mindset around mental health, right?
Yeah, it could be anything. I mean, it's really just like what
Yeah,
mindset would nudge us in a more loving and kind direction as a society?
a talk therapy is not everything. I think that that is something that in the mental health space that we don't talk about, and it puts people in a shame spiral when it doesn't work out for them, and then
Mhm.
they get even more in their head, and then they're not kind, and they don't have resolution to what's going on. I would say that's, like, my biggest one, and I also think right now is, like, men's mental health is a really big one that I
Yeah.
always think about. We don't talk a lot about men's mental health. We don't talk about, that they're 3 out of 4 are more prone to alcohol and drugs.
Yep.
Their highest rate of suicide is with men. So just like hug a male in your life and just tell them that like you see them and that you love them is what I would say. Those would
Yeah.
be my 2.
Yeah, I recently listened to a podcast on men's mental health, and I think there's just so much stigma around males in general. Brad, I talked on Tuesday, even brought it up. He's just like, you just don't cry in our family. Like you just suck it up and you just be grumpy for a day and you move on with your life. It's like, males are not the best at having, hey, problem over here, so I think it's really important too. No, that's
And
great.
with that, I think that it's like also, you know, and I know we're getting into like gender right now, but it's
Yep.
also like females being able to hold the space when their man is going, you know what, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
and I need a place to like have support, because I think that like we also have a role in that to go, oh my gosh, you know what? Like you crying is actually one of the most attractive things you can do, because it's showing me that you're a human and you're not a shell, right?
Yeah.
Or like holding that space, I think like is going to create so much more love and peace and less anger in our world, right? Like I feel like anger is the number one emotion that gets everyone in trouble and starts wars over it, etc., right? And I'm like, if we could focus on our men and their anger and their mental health, like I think our world would change.
Oh my God. That'd be awesome. Yay for that. Where can people go to learn more about you? Like where is your appropriate place?
Yeah. Yeah. Instagram's where I'm the most active, so that's alliecates.co. You can also find me on my website, which is also alliecates.co, and everything else, social media, TikTok, all of it.
Awesome. You've been amazing, Ali. I am so glad that we got to have this. And clearly, I feel a round two coming at one point because there's so many more topics we could have just kept going on and on about. So thanks for having. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to another episode of The Standard. Before we go, click on the link in the show notes of this episode to learn more about today's guest. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody who you think would benefit from it as well.